John Reed. I'm live with Sina Moatamed. Did I get your name right?
Yeah, you got it. That's
Excellent.
perfect. I like it.
Nice. So those of you can get his Twitter handle. Sina's one of my favorite thinkers on cloud, and it seems like yesterday, but it was right around the time we launched Genomica, you and I had a conversation about how your thinking has evolved around the cloud CIO, and this issue of CIOs is coming up a lot. We have a lot of data on this that you and I can talk about that has come out, but basically you and I are kind of sold on the value of cloud, but CIOs are kind of in a bunch of predicaments. So we're going to
Yeah.
go through some of that research, and you and I are going to offer our talking points. But I also just want to kind of get an update on, the last we left you. I know you're not the kind of guy that likes to rest on your laurels with this stuff, so I'd really like to get an update on where your research is taking you. And of
Right.
course,
No.
your
Yeah.
day-to-day job informs that research. That's what makes it interesting for you, I guess, right?
Yeah. It definitely does. That's you got to live in it to really have any sense of what the vision might need to look like in the future. But yeah, it's been great. I mean, up till now, I think a lot of our conversations and dialogue have been around this notion of a new operating model for IS, and really that cloud was sort of the tipping point and the kickoff point of where the paradigm shift of how the IS organization is going to operate and facilitate services for the business has been completely changed. And so now, instead of having a wonderful pre-plan and anticipation of what that world would look like, in a reactive mode, CIOs everywhere are challenged to rethink how they're going to structure their organizations and not look at cloud services as a threat to their own relevance, but to rethink their worlds and rethink about what value do they actually bring, and that there should be embrace to cloud, and that they need to wrap cloud services with supporting services that actually drive a really great user experience. And so because it's been so much focused around really what is the mechanics of delivering this new IT model of operations, I'm now starting to delve into, okay, you now have that new operational model. What's the implication in terms of where you focus once you get that supply chain of services built out? And so I think that's where I'm focused right now. And I know very high level in concept and chatter, but that's really kind of the next stage, is what's the user experience. So
Yeah, this is interesting to me because I wrote my first email newsletter on this content in 1998. It was called Extending the Enterprise, and this was around the time when people first started thinking about, look, these internal transactional systems are not going to get it done, and we need to find ways of connecting to customers and suppliers. I think what's really interesting about today's conversation is that, yes, you can get stuck on the technology hype around cloud and mobile and all that stuff, analytics, but when you really take a step back, what you realize is that we're reaching a little bit of a shift where some of the technology is actually there for us now, whereas it really wasn't in 1998.
right.
The ideas were good, but the ability to really create that, especially for like a mobile type of workforce, it wasn't there.
Right.
Whereas now it's there, the tech is there, but you really run a risk of failing if you can't engage the user, and the user is no dummy.
No.
The user has a lot of tools, and they might prefer to use their own tools over that which you would provide them if your tools stink,
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely true, and I think that's where the extension of thought is that once cloud emerged, the user is now in the driver's seat. They could pick and choose the services that made sense to us or to them. But I think that the part that's really interesting too is I think you're touching on a generational challenge, right? Because you and I we're old, right?
Yeah.
But there's a whole new they've never known a world without internet, right? And they know how to grab these tools and leverage it for themselves. And so these people are not saying, I want a job in the IT field. They go into the line of business. That's their practice. But they bring with them a whole wealth of knowing how to grab this tool from the cloud, that tool from the cloud, and construct a set of utilities for themselves to be effective in the job that they're really actually trained themselves for. And this is so, as much as we talk about the disruption of cloud, there's also this generational phenomena that I don't think is fully arrived yet, but we're getting close. And I only know that because I'm starting to feel old, so
Yeah.
I know it's coming. And so I think we're gonna see that probably within the next 5 years. And where that'll be most impactful and seen is if you're actually living in the line of business, if you're actually in the business unit and you start seeing these college hires come along and they know how to leverage every tool. So now the trick is, can they go get a tool from someplace that the organization itself has sanctioned and wrappered with the right controls and structures so that it's bringing even more enhanced user experience as they latch onto it. And that to me is really the sort of the next hurdle for the CIO once they get past the operating model. But yeah.
Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, I think some of the conversation about everything as a service kind of bothers me a little bit because to me, it feels too abstract. The last time you and I talked, I really liked how you described the IT as storefront, because to me, that's where it gets really interesting when you talk about users, because users are used to storefronts now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And we know the ones they like, whether it's iTunes or to Google Play and definitely Amazon, and a lot of it is the frictionless experience of consumption, right?
Yeah.
And so you think about that as a goal for IT, where they're providing applications in a storefront, but not just applications, many applications, and really just plain services, as you described, as a storefront, both for external constituents and internal constituents, and that really reshapes the conversation to me. And like you're describing, the storefront is not, in that case, it's not just applications, but it's wrapped with all the compliant, secure, necessary add-ons that used to give, that used to cause so many delays in the process. Is that still the vision that you're holding on to?
Yeah, no, it is. It's absolutely it. I mean, if you want to distill what IT should be, it's an e-commerce company now. You are creating an e-commerce environment. And I think what's kind of interesting is that, are you a wholesale manufacturer who's now creating a storefront for yourself? In reality, we're now an e-commerce distributor, right? We're a distribution company because we're no longer in the build business. We're actually buying services and brokering them through. And so, but when you do that, if you just allow people to just, if all you're doing is just being an intermediary just to do the transaction alone, you're not bringing a lot of value other than, I guess there's one place they can go and click a button, buy what they need to buy. But if you can wrapper those things with things like identity managed services, so they have a single sign-on experience. Right. If the application they get is integrated with the master data system, so that when they get that application, all their accounts and all the people they need to contact is already loaded in that platform. They don't have to reconstruct and rekey and do all that. You're now creating an not just, I got the app that I want to do my job, but I got the app that I want in a way that I can engage it from any device, from any place, and it's loaded with the information that I need. So I'm hitting the ground running and I'm gone. But there isn't this long cycle to engage. It's in the catalog, I grab it and I run with it. Now there is work to actually get it into the catalog, and I think that's the operating model that that CIOs and enterprises are going to have to go through to actually build and create. But once you've done that, you're really shaping a high quality user experience. And that's your end goal as an IT professional and as a CIO. And so it becomes a really interesting challenge. And so we have a transition to make. And in the midst of doing all that, you're still living in the same financial structures that you always had. You still have the same organizational obstacles and siloed based on technology. So there's a huge shift. And so this isn't a technology battle. It's a cultural acceptance of change and and then realizing your new purpose on the other end of that change, as opposed to the death of me. And so it's really carrying people through that. That's the obstacle, and that's what a great CIO, I think, is challenged to do today, to sort of get to the other side of this. But anyway, yeah.
And I think that brings us nicely into some of the research that I wanted you to riff on and go through.
Sure.
We have IDC's 10-point prediction plan. I want to go through each one of them, and
Sure.
but before we get that, I want to start with a little bit of research from CIO.com, because I think it frames this issue pretty well in terms of this. The question that you have, obviously, is that a lot of these CIOs are still bogged down in what I think of as just at best operational excellence. At worst, it's patching and maintenance and
Yeah.
thankless chores.
Yeah.
What I say about that of late is that if you don't do that stuff right, it'll get you fired. But doing that stuff right doesn't do anything. Doesn't help you keep your job. It just
No.
you're gonna get fired if you screw it up.
Right. Exactly.
So you have to get that stuff done. And the survey results from CIO.com kind of reflected that, and they talked to 722 CIOs from a number of countries. So it's a pretty
That's why.
pretty decent sample size. And 25% of those surveyed reported that they perceive themselves as were perceived as colleagues by their business peers. So I think that's kind of what we're going for, right? Because you can't roll out these relevant services without having that context. But then almost 50% conceded that their IT groups are viewed as by their fellow employees as a cost center or service provider. We get back to that in a sec. And then a little more than 25%, which is a substantial minority, say the CIO role is essentially sidelined at their companies, so they don't really even have a seat at the table. So I think that paints an interesting set of predicaments. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so, if a CIO's job is strictly to be focused on the run, right? And I think that's what we're touching on. And so much of the role has been that. And you still have legacy environments, right? You still have what you have. You've built business processes around existing infrastructures. And so part of the challenge is that, as much as aspirationally as a CIO, I say, no, I want to be the business visionary. I want to seat at the table. I want to be that person. You can't get there because your time and your cycles and your KPIs of measurement against how you are performing as a CIO are still against that run. And so there's a time lag. There's a transition that needs to occur. But the sort of the goal is to move away from run activity, because you're not bringing value in the run. You're going to bring value in participating in a business conversation and understand what the user experience needs to be. What can IT do to fulfill the experience in terms of strategy execution for the business or day-to-day process activities for the business, and really be focused there and spend your energies there, and that all your activities and your IS focus is really around that. And then 20-25% of the rest of the activity is then in this overall run. But the run is going to start shifting away from building systems and deploying, and it's going to be really around creating this supply chain of providing services back to the business. The rest of it will be consultative, and it's going to be engaging at the business unit side, which then has implications for what that IS organization is going to look like, because eventually that will roll into the business potentially as well. Not the whole IS organization, but a good portion of it. But there's a hurdle to go through, right? You still have to get to the place of where you're changing the dialogue within your IS organization first, and the focus, before you'll ever find a place or a seat at the table with the business, the rest of the business. So it's a big challenge. It's a huge hurdle. So, yeah.
Yeah, a couple of quotes. One about the group in the middle, that larger group. Their top activities are improving IT operations, deploying new systems, and controlling IT costs. managing IT crises is also high on the list.
Mm.
And then the CIO.com author wrote, that sounds like a CIO job description from 1995.
It does
Um,
sound like it.
so that's not especially promising for individuals in that situation. And then in the so-called group that feels sidelined, that 25
Yeah.
or so percent, says um, they don't feel like they have a lot of control over their IT budget. They're losing the control over that
Hmm.
to other
Absolutely.
groups, lines of business. Much more likely to have concerns about the increase in shadow IT,
Oh yeah.
which makes sense because they would have very little say-so in what's happening. And it says overall they spend more time on cost control, security, and negotiating with vendors, less time leading change and driving business innovation. So I thought that was pretty interesting
It is.
just from the vantage point of like, you know, I doubt if you sat a bunch of these folks down and described the vision that you're talking about, I doubt there would be very many of them that would disagree fundamentally with what you're talking about. These things are too far along now.
Right.
But
Right.
it still does raise a very practical issue, which is, how do you develop that? How do you make that change within your own company? And listen, I mean, I think in some situations the culture is just going to fight you on it, and you're just going to have to
Sure.
move on, and that's a reality.
Sure.
But for a lot of CIOs, the question I think is more about how do you take practical steps towards the transitions we're talking about, while not losing your fastball and the stuff that people do expect currently.
Right, right. And no, that's a big challenge. I mean, but there is this like, and I've had jokes about this with some colleagues, and say, well, at what point do you realize that your IT department is the shadow IT department, right? When the rest of the business organization is taken off and they've run away with really driving their own services, and IT isn't bringing any value to that. They're just a cost center bucket, and that that view of you, if you're already sidelined with that view of IT, is that you are just this cost bucket. It's only going to get worse as business units go out, drive the services that they want, drive their own success, and they go, what is this group doing? They're not even connected to me in any way. My guys are the ones that are actually driving things forward. We're the ones managing the services that we get online. I don't even see the value for this, and the more that conversation goes on and mills around, the more challenge that is, right? But I think so you have to, as a CIO, say, this is the new paradigm. This is where I am, and so the focus has to be very, very different, and you have to recognize that you are no longer in charge of saying this is the right system for you. This is the right platform for you, especially at the line of business. But you are in charge of saying, here's how I'm going to make your choice for services even better. I'm going to enhance your services, and you may need to start with just one area, one part of the organization, one that will then become the advocate for what you do, and not the one that'll discredit your value. And so you start rebuilding your credibility. But it's a big challenge. And I feel for organizations where the IT department has already been relegated to the sidelines, and now cloud's coming in to just punch them, from the back of the head on top of it. So
Yeah.
it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, it makes me think that if I were in that situation, I would try to dedicate part of I might incorporate a little bit of that shadow IT mentality and work on building an app that has some value, some customer-facing value, or
Yeah.
some, and essentially establish my entrepreneurial credentials within the business. There was in the CIO.com report, they mentioned a number of examples of CIOs who have done these kinds of things. One of them was a CIO of a finance-related company that they built a smartphone app that allowed customers essentially to pre-qualify for certain kinds of loans with their credit unions while they were sitting at car dealerships. And essentially the issue was
Wow.
that customers didn't always want to get loans from the car dealer, and so they were put in a situation where they were often having to shuttle over to their bank or credit union
Yeah.
to get the loan and then come back. And so they created a situation where that customer could do it on their mobile phone without leaving the car dealer.
That's brilliant.
And $1 billion in loans were issued via the mobile app that team built. And so I think that's just one example. And listen, I'm not saying I'm going to sprinkle pixie dust on these predicaments, but my point being, I think you might have to get a little bit aggressive yourself in order to overcome that culture. All right, so I want to go through this IDC report. It was
Sure.
10 market predictions for 2014, and they were geared towards this challenges CIOs are facing.
Okay.
And they talk about this concept called the third platform, and I want to get to that in a little bit. We can define that term a little bit, but it's essentially IDC's version of mobile, social, big data, and cloud services. Right. We can talk a little more about that. But so the first one, I think we've already covered pretty well, which is in 2 years, over 70% of CIOs will change their primary role from directly managing IT to becoming a innovation partner. I don't think there's any
challenge there. Yeah.
Real arguments with that prediction. We've covered that, I think. The next one's interesting though. Before 2017, only 40% of CIOs will rise to produce business-enhancing insights from big data and analytics. So, in other words, IDC is skeptical that big data and analytics are going to derive notable value for the business by 2017. I thought that was interesting because that's a few years out still.
Yeah.
So they're essentially saying that we're that we're still in the early in the hype cycle, I guess you could say. Although they probably wouldn't appreciate that since that's a different analyst firm's lingo. But
sure, yeah.
What do you think? Are we still a few years away from analytics helping out, or?
I don't know about that. I mean, I think if you're looking for an enterprise-wide monster, big data program, and it's going to be executed and in place, by 2017, then yeah, I would contend that that's not going to occur. I think there's a lot to be learned still on how you leverage it. What do you do with this? It's now a real-time system of learning, right? And what do you do with that data? I think where you're going to see success with it is in pockets of product experimentation by companies. Whatever products they're putting out in the street are going to be leveraging big data information, whether it be for marketing purposes or that engineering innovation, things like that. I think that you'll see pockets of excellence within the company, within different enterprises to actually achieve big data. But, is there going to be this enterprise-wide, center of excellence around big data? I think that's still a challenge, and a lot of it has to do with, I think a lot of people still don't know, and including myself to a certain extent, of what does it mean in total? Like, what is it going to, how do I really take full advantage of this? And I think there's a lot of experimentation still to be had in the space, but I think that you are going to see it take hold, but in very particular and focused areas, and so much will be learned on the back of those engagements that I think we'll see acceleration post those kind of activities and those success stories. But as far as I'm going to come in with this boil the ocean gigantic program and really see it take foot, I don't know about that. Yeah.
I think I view it similarly to you. If IDC is saying that, when are companies going to have a comprehensive big data infrastructure across the organization, 2017 might be premature for that, in my view. But are companies going to start reporting wins along this line? I think we're going to see some. I've already heard some. But it's going to be like, in fact, I think if you focus on the smaller wins, you're a much better chance of reporting one than if you try to build a huge architecture to handle all this. I mean, to me, someone said to me the other day, they were like, well, we've been talking about predictive for 15 years. What's different about it now? And what I said was, what's different is the APIs. What's different is the external data sources that are deeply relevant to your particular processes, whether it's weather data or data from local public officials that impacts, how it is you deploy products locally. Or, I had a customer come up to me at a conference earlier this fall and say, we want to pull in sensor data into our SAP environment.
Yep.
So if you have a very specific use case, to me, that's where you're going to get a win. And if that's the
Yeah.
case, then I think that might work. Now the next one is number 3 on our list from IDC. I thought this was a very interesting one. 70% of CIOs will increase enterprise exposure to risk in order to accelerate business agility through increased cloud adoption. That's kind of a mouthful, but essentially what they're saying is
Yeah.
that the NSA related Prism stuff and other sort of security cloud
Hmm.
issues that have come up are not going to be enough to slow down these trends. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think when and this industry, the whole tech industry has shown this time and time again that if there's a challenge, somebody is out there to help solve that particular challenge. It doesn't mean you need to go roll back, lock the door, get back in and draw down the curtains and go back to doing what you've always done. You got to get out of the house. You got to go and engage in a very different way. People aren't going to stop. And innovation and driving business competition is going to pull people out of their comfort zones and try to find new ways to actually meet these security challenges. I mean, is it a real issue? Absolutely, it's a real issue, but that means that you have to look to solve it, and there's all kinds of models in play right now to really address that. I mean, if we're worried about data, residing with the provider and it can be audited, people are looking to encrypt the data before it lands within a cloud provider environment, and so those service offerings are coming along. There's a whole host of things. Even the notion of what is in the cloud and where my enterprise data resides, people are starting to shutter their data centers, and they're moving into monster co-locations, and guess who their neighbor is? It's the cloud provider that you see online. And so the separation between your cage and their cage is a cross connect. And so now there's a different, the security vulnerability is much, is greatly reduced. And now when you're engaging those services, it's really about doing the same kinds of things that you do internally, which is you want to validate that security controls are in place and that you're taking care of your data assets. You build that into the contracts as a requirement, and you create a system of auditing. And you go and you spend money, cycles, time to go and audit to make sure they're doing what they say that they're going to do. But there's so many ways now to sort of address the issue and still leverage the sort of subject matter expertise that cloud providers can give a business without saying it has to be one or the other, and I'm out. I'm going to step out
Yeah.
of this arena. So I think there's a lot of solutions that are coming, but you have to make big changes as a CIO to make sure you're embracing it properly. So.
Well, I can sum up interesting anecdote along those lines. I was at a hotel in London last week, and I badly needed to get some work done, and I was killing time in the hotel lobby, and they had a great Wi-Fi network, but it's totally open network, no password protect or anything. And so my choice was either get work done on that network or don't get work done. And I chose
Yeah.
to get work. I chose to get work done, and I was feeling a certain urgency, and I think that's not unlike the urgency that some CIOs are feeling. But there's also other aspects to it, like Dennis Hallett did an interview with the CIO of Box, a guy named Ben Haynes, who has a pretty deep
Sure.
he has a pretty deep enterprise background. And what he told Dennis about security was that he would rather entrust his security to a cloud provider that has to get it right in order to stay in business versus an internal IT department. So I think there's an interesting view of that, which is just that the internal IT department is not necessarily as sophisticated and good at protecting from sabotage and security as one might think.
Yeah, they're not. And the other side to it is that in a sense, if you go to a cloud provider who's just providing one single service, by its nature, that service is compartmentalized from your other environment. So the big vulnerability in an internal enterprise is that I've got all my services internal, and it's just a wide open party for everybody who's inside the network to have access to anything, and any kind of nefarious activity could occur because it's just wide open. So there was a time, in the early 2000s, we talked about compartmentalization. Let's start putting firewalls in place and segment, and the cost just went up and up and up and up. And so now you say, wow, I can engage a cloud service, and by its nature, it's already compartmentalized. Now I just have to validate that they're putting within their structure the kind of controls that I'd want to see, and I think he's absolutely right. They're going to build in the kind of security profile and posture that any enterprise would be envious of, and say, God, I wish we had that everywhere. And so, but you have to pick and choose, right? And then there's still going to be sort of a Shecky the car salesman cloud service out there that you're going to have to look at and go, there's no way I'm dropping any data off with you, and you have to do your due diligence. So it's just a matter of spending the time, but I think he's dead on. I agree with that comment.
Yeah, I think the only final thing I would add is I do think, and I think IDC probably wouldn't disagree with this because they issued a full report on this. These are just the bullet points, but I do think we are going to see some industry variation on this whole issue of cloud security, right? I mean, aerospace and defense and healthcare are two industries that come to mind where data security and compliance stuff is going to carry extra weight. But anyhow, so now we're moving into a few predictions that tie into your sort of young mobile demographic point. Number 4, enterprise business mobility will require 60% of CIOs by 2017 to support an agile architecture with next generation mobile applications. That it's kind of a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Number 5, the demographic shift to young and mobile customers will require 80% of CIOs and consumer-facing businesses to integrate IT with public social networks by 2015. That's an interesting one.
That's a big one. Wow. I mean, I think I think there's an inevitability to it, right? I mean, that's, again, I think that this generation coming up, they're already living there. They're already participating and engaging each other in that space, and not too unlike the story where a business unit will just go and find a cloud service that they want. This is how people are collaborating and engaging anyway now, especially this generation that's coming up. And so you can't do anything about it other than embrace it and make sure that you're maybe managing it in a way that's most secure as possible. But to really try to, again, lock the door and throw away the key and not allow it to happen might get you somewhere for 10 minutes, and then people will find a workaround to that anyway, and they're going to be there. So I think, again, it's another reality that has to be embraced, and you have to find the right solution. But yes, I don't disagree.
Number 6, by 2015, third platform requirements will drive 60% of CIOs to use enterprise architecture as a required IT tool, but only 40% will deploy enterprise architecture effectively. Now, there's a couple of things about this one.
Yeah, first, loaded.
first, we're going to have to talk a little bit, it's about what they mean by third platform, but also enterprise architecture.
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of a something we were talking about a few years ago? Like, do we still need this kind of like fussing over architecture? It seems to be only vaguely tied to business results, or am I wrong about that?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think I think two things happened for enterprise architecture that have been a challenge. I don't think the messaging of what enterprise architecture was about was ever clearly understood and interpreted and deployed by any enterprise. It became very much about technology. But if you really look at the skeletal system of enterprise architecture, it started with business architecture, business strategy, business needs, and then because of the complexities of building and running, the focus really all went around what is my technical architecture, but how do you map that back to the business need? And so the problem has been that it's always been an engineering exercise up, right? You start engineering and tooling and trying to figure out the ins and the outs of systems, and then you go, gosh, I hope I provided the business what they wanted. Oh, well, it really doesn't matter because I'm only I'm the only shop in town that can provide them anything anyway. And so the focus was so much around that side of it, like an engineering out kind of concept, where really enterprise architecture was supposed to be about the business and then, right, into the IT realm. And I think that there needs to be some major rebranding around enterprise architecture, and maybe we stop calling it that and just focus around business architecture and create a real practice around what kind of business capabilities do people need. And once you understand that and create almost a center of excellence around how you're going to pull that information in as a CIO and be the data collector, which means it's a very business-related conversation, and that's a whole new practice in a way that I don't think enterprise architecture groups have sort of crossed that barrier very well because of the history. So I think that's that side of it, and I think third, what do they call the
Third platform, yeah.
third platform, which is really mobile. It's big data. And what else did they have in there? So
I would say it's probably cloud, big data analytics, cloud, social, mobile.
Gotcha. So I think it's kind of interesting because there's this notion about, well, what is innovation? What is IT doing to innovate, right? And this is one of those lovely buzzwords of where innovation really lives, and I think mobile is just an artifact of how people want to engage, and
right.
I don't see mobile though as a real innovation by itself in any way. I think where the real innovation lives is going to be in big data and the Internet of Things, and really cloud, the device, are modes of service delivery. But I think where innovation really is going to come out of is in this notion of the Internet of Things and with the analytics against that. And we're going to learn a lot about people behavior, machine behavior, and based on that information, we're going to see tremendous innovations come out of that. But the mobile side of it and the cloud side of it, to me, is a new delivery model. But it by itself isn't a mark of innovation. So I guess I'm a little conflicted when I hear this clustering of these major themes of change in the IT realm. But still, from a business perspective, the meat to me is in the analytics and big data and Internet of Things. So it should be interesting.
It's interesting they didn't really get into Internet of Things much in these predictions, which is probably a bit of an oversight on their part. The other thing is that there just wasn't as much as I expected around embedding products with sort of smart products, right? Like,
yeah.
And I guess if you're a services industry, it's not as important, but certainly for any manufacturing company, IT has a golden opportunity to reinvent itself by smartening up the product line, so to speak, and that really wasn't listed there. I think the other danger with this third platform language is I think it runs the risk of you start to lose the understanding of what a platform really is, which is kind of an important conversation. And like Gartner has a similar sort of view on this, but they describe these things as the so-called nexus of forces, which is also like a heck of a phrase. But the point is simply that the thing I take away from this is that we have to be careful not to have a buzz conversation, but but the idea that these forces are converging and that they have a relationship to each other makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Like you think about cloud, mobile, and analytics and social as different elements
Absolutely.
that they interact together, and to me that's the big takeaway. But it comes down to more like which one you would prioritize. Comes down a lot, I think, to discrete projects, right? Because business people don't sit down and say, how can we do a project that uses cloud, mobile, social, and analytics?
Right.
You know,
No, no, they don't.
they sit down and they say, why don't we involve customers in helping to pre-configure their own products so that we
Yep.
don't have to do all that for them, for example, you know? So
Yep.
so I think those are and then from that conversation you start having this broader thing or what technology is available to help with that particular problem, right? But as far as platforms are concerned, I think IDC didn't really talk about this, but in my view, that's one of the big changes we're going to see is the enterprise applications market really moving towards a platform view,
Yep.
which is a major break from the past, because in the past it was really about uh, customizing your on-premise applications with custom code to get the functionality you wanted.
Right.
And obviously cloud changes that paradigm, but the problem with cloud is that sometimes cloud is just too standard for what customers need. So
Absolutely. Yep.
and there's a reason for that.
Yep.
So okay, you can do some configuration in cloud products, but the point is, no, you can't customize the code base. That's the whole idea.
No.
So you're going to need applications, right? That's how you're going to build the kind of enterprise apps that you
Yep.
need. And you might buy some of those from partners or developers, or you might build them yourself. But the idea is they're all going to live on a platform. And to me, that's another thing that IDC didn't really mention here, but I think that's going to be a big change. And the way that manifests itself is that, 3 years from now, this is John Reed's prediction.
Sure. Sure.
3 years from now, when buyers look at enterprise products, I think they're going to heavily consider the ecosystem of applications around the product and the ability to easily build on those products as much as they are the products themselves. Very similarly to how consumers assess mobile devices, right? Where they might never say it along those lines, but they gravitate towards products where they can download a ton of apps. You know,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I
so
agree, and I think it's an interesting point. I think for a while we've been looking at sort of the way, and I think a little while ago we were having a conversation around this subject, but that the cloud providers, when they built their line of business, services, would then mature and say, let me build a platform around this so I can still maintain the vanilla of what I do, and then here's a platform that can augment that. And so then it became this package deal where I get my SaaS service and then they're also providing me a platform. The reality is that the platform orbit the SaaS product. The SaaS service orbits the platform.
right,
And that, I think, is the ultimate gotcha. If you're a cloud provider that put out a great SaaS product and then you put a platform right behind it and you got people hooked in, oh, you got them. They're done, because the platform, in essence, is really the glue for you to tie and interconnect business logic between different SaaS services. And so if you just keep looking at platform for every single SaaS service, you lose the ultimate, I think, value proposition and the purpose of what a platform environment will do. And that's not to say you're going to have just one platform. It won't happen. There will be multiple platforms, but they're not going to be coupled in a way with one particular SaaS platform and then be able to scale out. Unless you're completely on board with that provider and you're like, I'm all in, that's
right.
wonderful. But the platform is, and there are many different types of platform. And so, conversationally with colleagues, we've been talking about that there's really the enterprise platforms, and there will be this sort of core set of environments where you can do development, and it may serve different types of constituents and different types of engagement models. And so, and that's fine. I think that's okay, but but to just sort of and this is one of those pieces where IT can really bring value around business line of business service engagements, is to then say we have an environment ready. Let's get your platform in. Let's wrapper it with identity management. That's a platform, not for development, but it's in looking at it from an enterprise platform view. Integration. How are we going to tie things together and create continuity and process? That's a platform in a sense. But then there's the core platform where you really are developing new vertical capabilities for any service that comes along, and you add to the vanilla that their providers providing. That's really I think the value added proposition of what IT can bring. But it's essential to have that kind of as part of your enterprise tool set.
Yeah, and I think I don't think IDC intended this, but the IDC. I'm just asking you guys to go easy on the platform lingo because we got to save it for when we really need to talk about platforms.
Absolutely. Yep.
Because customers right now, I have yet to run into a customer at an enterprise show that says to me, I really need a next generation platform. But I think they are going to need one, and I think in so many words they've said it, but the lingo just doesn't quite resonate. So we have to be a little careful with that.
And it probably does need to have some maturity around it as far as really getting it focused so people know what the animal is. Because you're right, it does get floated around, and even my inclusion of identity management and claiming it as platform even confuses it further. But I think, the notion is that there's this collection of tools that are maybe central to IS that can help bring continuity in the enterprise with whatever selection of services that they require. So that's really the essence of it. But yeah.
And the other thing that's sort of missing from this list is the absence of sort of the urgency of developing APIs to open up your own data so that outside either internal and or external developers can riff on that data and build their own value adds, which kind of goes along with the platform discussion, right?
Yeah.
You really can't have a good platform discussion without talking about APIs, and we're going to hear a lot about that because opening up your APIs is a big step towards solving some of the problems that you simply don't have time to solve yourselves, because there's a lot of developers out there who would eagerly help you solve those problems if you give them an opportunity.
Right. No, you're absolutely right.
All right, so let's breeze through a few of the rest. We've covered some of them. So number 7 is interesting. By 2015, 60% of CIO security budgets for increasingly vulnerable legacy systems will be 30 to 40% too small to fund enterprise threat assessments. So if you can handle the fractions and the percentages there, what I take away from that is that there's some pretty scary enterprise threats coming that we're not totally prepared for. Do you buy into that?
We're not ready for it. I think so. I mean, I think if you don't have a structured security program in an enterprise, you are asking for it. And the other side to it, there's this old saying of like, you pay now or you pay later. You're gonna pay. You're gonna pay, but it's gonna come at a cost to the enterprise in a way that wasn't intended. But the value of a strong security program and having a CISO who can bring that sort of framework, and again start with a business that understands how to engage the business, and that it's not about sharpening my technical tool chest. It's about creating a practice of thought throughout the enterprise, and that's sort of security champion you need out of a CISO who comes within an enterprise. It's an essential tool. I mean, I don't see any company that has any kind of intellectual property that they care about not doing this, and if they don't invest in it, and if they don't invest in it, and if they invest in it, they shouldn't see this as an IT function. They should really see this as creating a fabric of security posture throughout your organization. It's an absolute need, and so it's going to be really interesting to see if that ends up being true. Wow, I think you're going to see a world of pain for certain enterprises, and that will have a real impact and a negative impact to the business. So.
Yeah, I think the other interesting thing that you kind of brought up with this intellectual property issue, which is sort of a separate issue, but the whole future of intellectual property is an interesting one, and sort of the future of patents and patent law, and the ability to protect patents, the ability to go into business literally suing other people for violating your patents. I think it's going to be an interesting few years for the future of intellectual property and patents in particular.
Yeah.
And I don't think we have a clear understanding yet of what the courts are ultimately going to decide around these things.
Yeah, it's
So,
it's it's a challenge. I think the other part that sort of disrupts intellectual property, and we won't worry about sort of company to company, but even within a company, and the effect of collaboration in an environment, and how wide of a bandwidth, right? If you look at open source, it's totally wide, and the goal of open source is that somebody way out in the fringe just came up with an innovation, but because you're open and you're listening, you're going to capture that, and you can roll that into an open source tool or utility. In an enterprise, it's generally been very tower centric, and they've had attorneys, and they would be looking around, every element of where the intellectual property is, and having control on that data, knowing, exactly what's being done, and to take that to the patent offices and secure it. It's once you bring collaboration in, people are engaging in dialogue on intellectual property pieces that, if you're not managing your communities, if you don't have community managers in place that know how to embrace collaboration, you even have that challenge internal to your own enterprise as well. And so it's the whole thing is up for a review, that's for sure. But boy, there's just like an endless amount of disruption out there. So yeah.
yeah, and it becomes very interesting because you see it in the challenge facing marketing departments, where essentially marketing departments for larger companies essentially need to become their own internal media companies, because
Yeah.
consumers are opting into content. We're moving into an attention economy where
Yeah.
marketing to people in conventional ways is not working very well, but capturing their attention through content that really informs them in some way, or gives them a meaningful or entertaining experience, is what it's all about. And that changes intellectual property discussions also, because a lot of times that means giving away content instead of hoarding it. So there's
Right.
some massive transitions going on that IT folks also need to be involved with along those lines. A little beyond the scope of IDC, but I think those are trends that are pretty important. Okay, so number 8 on the list was such a mouthful. I'm not going to read it, but basically it has to do with what we've already discussed about transitioning into business innovation and value. So I think we already covered that pretty well.
Sure.
Number nine is by 2016. 80% of the IT budget will be based on providing a broad portfolio of IT and business services, which I think
Totally
is
agree.
pretty much along the lines of what you've already been saying. And then number 10, I'm not as crazy about, only because they gave themselves an out with a 2018 prediction, which, I mean, I could predict in 2018 that the sun's going to be blocked for 3 months and we're going to have nuclear winter. So so far off, I think, but they say by 2018, adoption of third platform IT technologies will redefine 90% of IT roles. And I don't know what you take away from it, but I do take away the one. I don't really care about the accuracy, the prediction, but I do
Mm.
think it provokes a very interesting conversation around that I think CIOs have to think about around, to what extent do I have internal skills to meet these new challenges? To what extent can I upskill and train internal individuals? And to what
Hmm.
extent am I going to need consultants and offshoring and all these other components to put the pieces together?
Yep. No, agreed. I mean, I think what is the core competency you want within your enterprise, and those will be choices. I don't think the adoption of these things is in question. It's going to happen. The question is whether you want to bring in that expertise. Can you pull the right talent to ultimately drive a business innovation that you're engaging these things in the first place for? So, the choice is really about, again, do I bring in and create a core competency, or do I go look to partners who are actually can deliver that for you and drive the same kind of success story out of them. But yeah, there's no doubt the adoption will come, and I just think the question is, from an investment perspective, what makes most sense for the enterprise, and it's going to vary. It's really going to vary. So I don't know there's a clear-cut answer to that.
Yeah, and going back to the state of the CIO content that we discussed at the beginning from CIO.com, they published the agenda for CIOs for 2014, and 72%, by far the most, was improve the use of data and analytics. The next one was support business and marketing goals, which is hardly surprising. We kind of touched on that a little bit. But the next two, improve IT project delivery and develop skills for emerging tech and innovation, were pretty big. And then reorganize or retrain IT to focus on business outcomes and innovations. That's a pretty substantial amount. Those were all around 50%, that are going to try to emphasize things pertaining to skills and training. And then the interesting part was the shift to a customer orientation is imposing a lot of skills pressure. 47% of the CIOs surveyed reported difficulties getting their IT staff to be more business oriented and customer facing. So I think that's an interesting, concerning aspect to this, because even if you have a vision of this, of business collaboration, if your internal team doesn't share that vision, then you're pretty much dead on arrival.
You are, and I think that's I think that one touches the ultimate nerve of where we are, because vision is one thing. Even having a path to get there is another thing, but to bring your organization along and embrace it, knowing that many of those people's careers, their focus, the thing that they've spent the last 20 years cultivating is up for disruption and a complete redo of skill sets, that's the big one. That's the big one. I mean, there's so much conversation around the technologies, and because they are so disruptive, but I think this is the big one, and it's not just an IT story. I mean, I think if you look around the enterprise and different job functions, even at the line of business levels, automation and computer intelligence is replacing a lot of staple roles and jobs and functions that ordinarily you had to have a guy to do, and now you don't really need that. And I think, and this is where I see the behavioral, and I see acceleration in that when you start looking at big data, Internet of Things, as we start learning a lot about the behaviors of how we interact with machine and with people, and that's collected in mind, and we derive new opportunities of innovation. Those innovations are going to start accelerating in terms of the level of disruption. I think we're on an upscale right now, and I think we're only we're just starting to see the upturn of the level of disruption. I mean, as much as we talk about it and we can put the disruption in a box, there's going to be a point where we may not even be able to put it in the box because it's going to be coming so fast and so quickly. And the amount of retooling somebody's going to have to do and how nimble you'll have to be in order to be relevant is the challenge, I think, for the next 50 years. It'll be really, really significant. So this is a really interesting marker, and I think in human history and economics and everything is going to be sort of hinged on how we handle and manage this as individuals. So it's tough now. It's going to get it'll become the new normal, that you will be retooling what you do as an employee, as a contractor, as a consultant, in almost every industry, because of the kind of disruptions that are going to be coming as a result. But so it's an interesting world. It's interesting.
Yeah. Pretty good note for us to wrap on. I think I just want to add to that the education and learning itself is undergoing heavy disruption,
Right.
and
Yeah.
in some ways it's promising. I mean, the thing that's tough is that the budgets for training and education seem to continue to shrink inside of enterprises, from what I can tell.
Yeah.
The promising thing is that if you want to embrace a continuous learning model and incorporate everything from online education to essentially availing employees availing themselves of not just trade shows but kind of constant online opportunities to interact and grow their skills, they're all there. But the catch is that it does involve, I think, culture change inside of some organizations. I don't know if you've run into this, but I still know a lot of friends who are banned at their companies from participating in networks that are viewed as social in a derogatory sense, but actually would have significant business value to them in their day-to-day roles. And so I think there's an opportunity there, but it
Yeah.
often does involve change
It
in order to
does.
take advantage of it.
Yeah, it does, and I think, and then that's part of the, the other challenges. We talk about the disruption to the IT organization and IT professionals, but even as business leaders are concerned, boy, if they have built a business that runs in a certain way for the last 30 years, with and they go, we don't need that stuff. We're still selling our product. We're still, this is, it's done from grassroots. This is how you do it. Real basics. That's great, but the competitive landscape is going to come, and suddenly, because you're not paying attention, because you're not engaged, you suddenly find yourself as an entire enterprise product and service offering irrelevant. And so and products that are going to be connected will be the products that people want in the future, for better for worse. That's where it's going.
Yep.
So
I
yeah.
think that's where we're going to end, but I do want to say
Cool.
one thing, which is maybe you and I will do a brief email on this, and I'll add it in. But cloud integration's no joke, folks.
Yeah.
Uh, so there's enterprise integration and the hassles that go with that are not going away, and I think that's an important piece to take into
Sure.
account. But other than that, I think we pretty much covered the entire landscape, Sina.
Good.
Thanks for
Good.
taking the time. Did we miss anything? I don't think we did.
No, that's great.
Um,
That was fun. That was
yeah,
fun.
yeah, it was good to have something to riff on and also to check in on you, and we'll look forward to tracking your blogs. Thanks for keeping one step ahead on these conversations. It makes for a great discussion.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. That was great. Appreciate
Enjoyed it,
that.
man.
All right.
That's
Perfect. Take care. We'll talk soon.